doing live webinars where we can share best practices and topics of interest to you. To learn more and to access the resources referenced in this video, please scroll down to the video description.
It looks like people are getting settled into place, so we will begin. So thank you for joining today's Lunch and Learn, which is about the Missouri home care community or targeted to the Missouri home care community. And we're going to talk about best practices for Missouri today. So we're going to do a quick welcome. And we do have a lot of Missouri best practices. I think this is going to be one of our most ambitious and longest webinars, but we're going to try to move through the materials quickly. And then we'll also take your questions down the road. So just to welcome the community here, if you haven't been to an Ankota webinar before, we're really all about the concept that home care is a very important industry, and we're all, there's an opportunity for us all to be successful, and that includes technology vendors like us and so many of the providers like you who are on the lines, and thank you to all of you who are our customers and that type of thing. But we're really trying to make the webinars open to a full community, and we're just here to facilitate and share what we know. And we're always looking for good inputs from the audience and share best practices. And today in general, we're really just not trying to only sell our software or even sell our software. Today, we're going to talk about best practices that should apply regardless of what software you use. The only exception to that would be that there are a couple specific examples of how things work, and the only software we have to show you how they work is in the Ankota software. But it's really a broad, open community event, and thank you for being here, and I hope you feel very welcome. So the topics today, we actually have two sets of topics, or two columns of topics anyway. We're going to talk really through the whole process of using software for compliance with your agency. So we're going to talk about best practices for onboarding your clients, demographics, authorizations, care plans, getting scheduling done. Titration might be a word that not all of you use. We'll get to that. That's about how you could make sure that you're using all of your units in the month, and especially in short months. So we'll talk more about that, and we'll talk about accrued minutes, electronic visit verification, the arrival and departure, and a couple of bonuses at the bottom. One about COVID-19 and what some of our Missouri agencies are doing on that front, as well as a bonus regarding what the latest information is that we're aware of on how Missouri is implementing EVV. So with that, we will go on to the before we start slide. A few things here is that this presentation will be put on YouTube, and one of the things, a little trick we've learned with YouTube videos, is that we have the ability to set a little timeline in the bottom of the video. And so you'll be able to sort of scroll down below the video and say, hey, like I never heard of that titration thing. Let me see where titration is in the video. And there will be a little timeline there, and the ability, I believe, in YouTube just to click on that item in the timeline, and it'll take you to that portion of the video. But if you have any questions as we go, please go ahead and type them in. And if they are relevant to what we're talking about at the moment, Sarah will read them and interrupt me. Otherwise, we'll save them for the end. Okay, so without further ado, we're going to talk about best practices for onboarding clients, and we always love getting new clients, so onboarding clients is a joyous activity for all of us. But one thing that we really stress, and we do this in our training as well, is you want to start with putting your client demographics in and making sure that it matches what came from your cyber access plan of care. You have the name right, the diagnosis code right, and then once you get them in, we have sort of this trinity of the authorization, the care plan, and the schedule. And if you start from the authorization, which again is on that cyber access plan of care, it really helps you to be on track, and we'll kind of walk through best practices in that order. So this is, so far we're talking mostly about our Medicaid clients and that are fed to us from cyber access and then billed through EmoMed, but we also, of course, handle our private pay clients, our VA clients, AAA clients, whatever cases that you have, and we'll talk about those as well. And in some of those areas, certainly for the VA, you have authorizations as well, whereas for private pay, you generally don't, but we'll talk through those cases as we go. All right, so number one is demographics. And some best practices are really, we want to make sure that we get our client ID, which in Missouri we call our Medicaid ID, the DCN. That's really the code that the state is going to use for, and EMOMed specifically is going to use for billing. So you have to have that right. And in Missouri, a lot of them have leading zeros, and you have to have just the right number of digits, and the leading zeros need to be there. And then just little things like spelling the name correctly and having, well, I'd say more important, the diagnosis code entered correctly are important. And we highly recommend, as the state is moving to enforcing electronic visit verification, that you work towards double checking the address and double checking the phone number, because this is what's used in electronic visit verification. We use the address to make sure that if the caregiver used the mobile app, that their GPS location is right where the address is, and if they dialed in for telephony, that they dialed from the right phone number. So double check those things. All right, so moving on to authorizations, the real critical things here that you want to put in are your start date, end date, visit type, and your units per month. So Missouri, different states do it different ways. Some states are more about units per week or units over the entire time period, but EMOMed, all the authorizations are looking at units per month. So that's why it's really critical to put it in as units per month, and it'll keep you on track that way. And in Missouri, in our in-home program, we'll often have a series of services. So we might have personal care, and then homemaker, and then respite would be a typical thing. And you definitely need to put those authorizations in separately, and you need to bill for them separately, and that type of thing. We'll talk about that later, because one of the best practices you should be looking for is, even though there's 3 services on the visit, like personal care, homemaker, and respite, you want your caregiver to only clock in once and only clock out once. And that's something that you should look for in your system. One other note there is that when you have CDS, sometimes clients get confused between CDS and essential transportation, and they'll put in 2 authorizations for that. And we definitely don't recommend that. We recommend that you take your CDS number of units and you put that in, and then you treat your essential transportation essentially as a task that's just like the other tasks on your plan of care, and that's how that works out. Okay, so moving down is that another thing that happens in Missouri is that in general, when you get an authorization, so if I got one today on July the 14th, then it would likely go through June 30th of 2021, and that's great. Having said that, when I get next year's authorization, it's probably going to come in with a June date. So it would come in and would say, okay, you're now authorized for maybe more units as of June the 11th of 2021. So what we highly recommend you do there is that you put in your new authorization, and then you end your old authorization. In that case, if you had this original authorization out through June the 30th of 2021, but now you got a new one that's effective June the 11th. So end the one that you had that ended originally on June 30th, change that to June 10th, put the new one in and say it starts on June 11th. And that way you will avoid any overlaps. And really, as soon as they give you that new authorization, it supersedes the other one. And there are certain reports and things you want to compare what's authorized to what's delivered in the month and things like that. And using this approach is going to make sure that all of your report data is reflecting the authorization change at the time that it was authorized and changed. Okay, so here's a typical scenario. So here the dates are a little different than I gave, but yep, it's October of 18 to the end of September of 19. We get the new one effective 9/14, and we set the expiration, the old one, to 9/13. So really, I use different dates, but it's the same example. Okay, so next thing talking about authorizations is that we all have our nursing visits. So in addition to our caregiving visits that are always authorized per unit, our nursing visits are billed and authorized per visit. And sometimes that nursing visit might be 45 minutes, sometimes it might be an hour and 5 minutes, and that sort of thing. So on in the world of nursing, it's going to be billed by the visit, and your unit for billing is a 1 unit kind of code. So think of it that way. So, and when you see, I guess what we see is what we call kind of patterns. So a lot of times we'll see some of our clients don't have any nursing Often they'll have their GHE, which stands for the General Health Evaluation. It's always, when you get a GHE, it's always 2 visits and they're always 6 months apart. So if you get a January authorization, you'll see that it's like February and August are your GHE. And then you'll also see weekly and monthly. And it's typical where you'll have both GHE and weekly or GHE and monthly, but we haven't seen cases where you have both GHE and weekly and monthly. That would be a little bit unlikely. And continuing here, it's really, again, authorized per visit. And what we see is that most agencies, when they have their GHE visit, they actually don't do an additional visit in that month. They replace the weekly or the monthly visit if they have those with the GHE visit that week or that month. Okay, so moving on to care plans, and I'm going to move a little bit faster because we have a lot of information to cover, is that we're going to get our care plan from Cyber Access, and it includes in the information not only the care plan tasks, but also the authorization. And and one thing that we've seen is that will, in our in-home program, we'll have sometimes a client will get personal care and homemaker, as we said earlier. And we'll see that on the Cyber Access Plan of Care, there's a good number of tasks on both. But we'll also see the case where there's a personal care authorization and it has what we generally recognize as 1 or 2 homemaker tasks, or it could be the opposite. We have a homemaker authorization, it has 1 or 2 personal care tasks. So I think what's going on there is that the assessor is saying, hey, this is really mostly a personal care case. I don't want to create an authorization for an additional type of visit or type of service, but I do want to add a task in that other category. And so in your master list of care plan items, there are sometimes the same type of task will be in both personal care and homemaker, I guess is a big takeaway of this. And so when we get our care plans, we actually want to set them up and say, hey, these are our personal care plans and these are our homemaker care plans, because we could have the case where one person is doing back-to-back personal care and homemaker visits, but then the next day a different caregiver is only doing the homemaker part, and in that case they only want the homemaker tasks. So a lot to think about there. All right, and then talking more about multiple authorization, we have a term that we call contiguous visits. So basically, a better term for that might be back-to-back visits. So I would say the most complicated case I've ever seen, and we do see this in Missouri, is you'll see that one person in one visit will have services for advanced personal care, then they'll have homemaker, then they'll have advanced respite, and then they'll have respite. So it's possible in that case, I can't remember if I listed 5 or 6 services, but the scheduling best practice is to schedule those back to back. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the caregiver could just clock in once and clock out once. And the system knows, because you've organized all your tasks, your care plan tasks with the appropriate service, to ask all the questions for all of those services. Whereas if somebody was only doing a subset of those services, then they would only be prompted for a subset of the tasks. All right, now some agencies, we actually see this a lot more in other states than we do in Missouri, but also want the caregiver to be able to add additional items onto the plan of care. And we do this with both our telephony and our mobile app. On the telephony, there's codes. So basically the caregiver would need to know, oh, if I am adding change linens, I need to put in code 22, that sort of thing. And then on the mobile app, if it's configured for your agency, they would be able to choose that from a drop-down list. But so that is a feature, and we have heard in meetings with the state that that's a feature that they consider desirable. But like I said, most of our Missouri agencies, which we have over 50, are not using that feature. But if you want it, just ask and we'll turn it on. All right, so finally, and this is of course the biggest part, I mean, everything's about our client. So we put in our client, our authorization, our care plan, and now our schedule. So just some scheduling best practices is that we want to, we actually meet some agencies that they reschedule every week or they reschedule every month. And part of that is because they're trying to take advantage of all the units that are authorized for the month, and it might be a short month and things like that. But the way that we recommend that you schedule in Ankota is you look at your typical month, which is a 31-day month, and you say, hey, what should we do each week so that in a 31-day month, we get all the visits we need to do. Now, the reality is that all 7 days of the week are not the same. So some of our clients we see on the weekdays and their family has them on the weekends, and sometimes it might be the opposite case. So so what we do is, we start by putting in the weekly pattern, and then if there's fewer days in the month, we might have some extra units, and we want to allocate those and that type of thing. And when we do schedule back to back, or when we do have multiple services, I guess I'll put it that way, we want to schedule them back to back. And another best practice is to put the respite last, right? Because we want to make sure that the caregivers are focusing on all of the tasks, and the respite is more to give the family a break. So, the natural way of conducting the business is that the caregiver is going to go in and they're going to do their personal care and their homemaker, and then they'll stay more time toward the end to give the family a break. And as I think I mentioned 3 or 4 times, the caregiver gets to clock in and out only once. And the way that we allocate it is because it's rare for the visit to be the exact perfect amount of time. So if we have, let's say, an hour of personal care followed by an hour of homemaker, and they were there for 2 hours and 5 minutes, so they were there 5 minutes over, we would allocate the first hour to the personal care, and then the remaining time, in this example, the hour and 5 minutes to the homemaker. And we'll talk about what to do with those extra minutes in a little bit. All right, so a couple special considerations for CDS. Sorry about that, I got to go backwards here. Is that the client is really the person, as implied by the name. It's consumer-directed services. So the consumer is really the one who's scheduling their caregiver, and your job as the agency is to administer the program. And so in order to do that, what the best practice that we recommend is that you schedule. It is good to put a schedule in there so that you are allocating your time for the month. So just to give a very simple example, if I have, let's say, 1 hour a day, 7-day a week case, that would be 124 units, right? So it would be great if you said, okay, hey, if you're going to do 7 days, let's put an hour on the schedule for every one of those 31 days of the month. And it's there, but you aren't really the one, or you're not the one who's directing what time they go. So just put it on and say there's just an hour of duration. I'll show you what that looks like in the system, the Ankota system, in a little bit, and that type of thing. And then if you let's see, and then another thing that happens with CDS is sometimes the caregiver lives in the home and they're providing care for that individual all day. And in that situation, like, let's say that the state is paying them for 3 hours of care per day, but they're providing more. Another best practice that we do is you put that 3-hour duration in there, and there's a setting to say, hey, after the 3 hours, then you would, kind of stop the time, because the caregivers aren't all that religious in that case of saying, okay, well, I just clocked in for my paid time at 8:17 a.m. I have to clock out at 11:17 a.m. They might instead just clock out in the middle of the afternoon, and in that case, the system will, just allocate the 3 hours. Now, one little thing, it's not on the slide here, but in that case, if there are certain things where the CDS attendant wants to do less time on one day and more time on another day, and that was directed by the consumer, then you have to make some schedule changes, and they should call the office to do that with you, and that way keeps everything straight. All right, so I mentioned this term a couple times. It's called titration, and what this means is that we have situations where most of our months, there's that old poem, 30 days have September, April, June, and November, and of course February had 29 days this year, but usually has 28. And using the COVID-19 joke here in 2020, it's felt like March had about 48 days and April had about 73 days, but I'll take that off the equation for now. But basically, the cyber access allocation is always based on a 31-day month. So if you do have that, let's say February, that 21-day month, and you're normally getting 248 units, you're going to have those extra units. So if it's a 30-day month, you'll have 1 day's worth of extra units. If it's February, you might have 2 or 3 days worth of extra units, depending on whether it's leap year. And then what you could do is, if we continue with this example, 30-day month, yeah, it does the math for me, has the 8 extra units. The 28-day month, I'll have 24 extra units. And then the best practice is before the month even starts, you just spread those units out on other days. So you're making sure that your client is getting all the care that they're authorized for. And so that's the benefit there, is that you get to use all those units. And if you do use the Ankota system, it'll do that automatically for you. So when you go into, let's say, what are we in now? So July and August are 31-day months, but then when you go into September and it's a 30-day month, it would take those extra units and automatically allocate them to the early days in September. I will say that there's also this concept of titration within the month. So normally we want to schedule and have everybody follow that schedule. But if, let's say, there's a hospitalization and you were supposed to be delivering 8 units a day and they were in the hospital for 3 days, well, now, very similar, you have those 24 units. And so in that case, I mean, what you might want to do is say, hey, they just got out of the hospital, so I'm going to give them more time and more help over the next couple of days. But there is also an opportunity, if a caregiver is ahead or behind of their units in the month, to use that titration function to spread the remaining units within the month. All right, and then this is one of the big Missouri curveballs. I think the only other state that we're aware of this happening is in Virginia. But what happens is that in the world of home care with EVV, people don't always work the exact amount of time. So if it's scheduled for 3 hours, they might have worked 2 hours and 58 minutes, or they might have worked 3 hours and 6 minutes, and that kind of thing. So it's typical for it not to be perfect. So in this example, they were scheduled 8 to 10, they got there at 8, and they left at 10:04. And in this case, what you could do is like keep a little bucket on the side, as just was depicted, is you could put those 4 buckets in there, or those 4 extra minutes in the bucket, and then the next day, if they work an additional 11 minutes, you could combine the 11 and the 4, and you get another 15 minutes. And when that happens, you get to bill another unit. So again, if on Monday I worked 2 hours and 4 minutes, on Tuesday I worked 2 hours and 14 minutes, now I have more, 14 plus 4, I have 18 minutes, so I could bill an extra unit once I cross over that. And again, the Ankota system takes care of that automatically for you behind the scenes. All right, so this next one, EVV, 3 little letters, but there's a lot to it. And this is one of the biggest topics in home care nationwide in the Medicaid community this year, as this all goes into effect. But we do have multiple ways of doing EVV. The first is the word. When people see it the first time, they sometimes call it telephony, but the actual pronunciation is telephony. And basically what that means is that the caregiver is clocking in from the client's home phone, or we're using caller ID to verify that they are at the home. It has to be a landline. And then the next most popular is, or I would say actually even probably the most popular now, is agencies using mobile app and using GPS, which is the global positioning satellite location. Just like when you're using Google Maps, it knows where you are to match to the client's location. We will do a demo of this in a second, but I will mention fobs. So fobs are, and I have a picture on another slide, are a way that if the client doesn't have a home phone and the caregiver doesn't want to use their mobile phone, you could put a device in the home, and then they could call from, at that point, you have this little device that keeps track of the arrival time and the departure time by pushing a button and getting a secret code off of the device. But we have heard and this comes later in the presentation, but we have heard from the state that the state really is trying to move off of the concept of having people use the fobs as they go into EVV. So we'll talk more about that later. But we did promise in the lead up to this webinar that we give a demo of how offline mobile works. So with that, and without further ado, I'm going to jump to a screen here. So this is just a demo environment where I'm looking at this visit for, so what you're seeing here is we have this caregiver, Carrie the caregiver. We're seeing this week, and we're actually speaking today is Tuesday, July the 14th. And we have this visit where Carrie the caregiver is providing service to Betty White, and this blue color indicates that they've already arrived. And so what I'm going to bring up now onto the screen is what my mobile app looks like. And I'm doing this actually with my phone. So I have an Android phone. If you have an iPhone, it looks almost identical, but slightly different. And so here, as you compare it to the schedule board here, I'll just kind of move it out of the way, is that we have this schedule and they have this visit with Morgan Freeman that's scheduled. We have this consumer directed visit where they have arrived at 12:29, and now they want to go ahead and clock out for that visit. So I'm just going to do it on my phone, and you'll see that, so here I'm going to click this on my phone, and you'll see that what goes on is, well, right now I guess my phone is online, and if I were to report the departure, it would reflect on the screen in real time. But what I'm going to do on my phone first is I'm going to go back to my home screen. I'm going to go into settings, going to go in connections, and I'm going to go to my mobile network. And hold on one second, or data usage rather. And I'm going to turn off my mobile data. So at this point, I no longer have access to the mobile network. So my phone is offline. So I'm doing this way to, kind of simulate being offline, because I do have, mobile coverage. I'm also not on my Wi-Fi. So at this point, the phone is totally offline, and I'm going to go back to the home page, and I'm going to go back into the Ankota Caregiver app. But the important thing here is that it remembers that I clocked in, and it would have been fine if I clocked in when I was offline as well. It knows I need to report departure. So I'm clicking that here. And here it is at 1:27. I'm accepting my time, and I'm confirming my departure. It's letting me report all my tasks. I'm just going to say that I did clean the bath, I cleaned the floor, we did the dressing and grooming. I could say that the laundry wasn't needed today, and that we did the tidy and dusting. And then I'm going to save that. And then I go on to my page. And by the way, these are optional, but you could, if you want, you could capture a client signature, you could capture a caregiver signature, and you could put, notes on the page. So we're all set there. But once we have everything captured, then I'm going to go ahead and submit that my visit was completed, and it knows that my time was from 12:29 to 1:27, which is great. And I'm going to submit that. And from the perspective of me on my mobile app, I'm done, and I could go back to my home screen, and I could start driving over to Morgan Freeman's house for my next visit, because this one is closed out and this one's still scheduled. So I'm all good from my mobile perspective as a caregiver, but I'm offline, even if I don't know I'm offline. And just to kind of prove that they're offline here, I'm going to refresh this screen, and it's going to still show this visit as in the arrived state at 12:29. It's not going to know anything about this departure. And because let's say at this point the caregiver is still online, but now as the caregiver, I'm driving down the road, and I get back into mobile coverage when I get a little closer to the highway, let's say. So here, if I bring back onto the screen my phone, and I simulate that again by going into the settings, the connections, and by the way, this is something you would never need to do unless you wanted to train it, but you probably never even need to do that. Go back into data usage, and now I'm going to turn my mobile data back on. Okay, so now I'm good to go, and that's really all I need to do. And if I go back to my Ankota system, the fact that it got its network back, the Ankota app is going to be waiting, behind the scenes for, or it's going to say, hey, do I have mobile? Do I have mobile? Do I have mobile? And as soon as it has mobile, it's going to go ahead and report, they did have that mobile access, and it's going to, kind of update the system on the back end. And when we refresh the screen again, we're going to see here that now the visit is in the closed status, and it changed colors to dark green, and we know that we actually departed at 1:28. So that's the way that goes. So that's kind of that. All right, so we're going to jump back into our webinar slides here and keep going with our best practice marathon here, and we'll just keep on hammering down. Thank you for, I see a couple questions have come in, so thank you for those. We'll get to them in a little bit. All right, so next one is continue on the topic of electronic visit verification, is a best practice to tell the caregiver when to clock out. So I've mentioned this scenario, but if my schedule is from 10 to 1, On some days, the traffic might be good and I get there at 9:56 or I get there at 9:45 even. And in other days, my traffic might be bad and I don't get there until 10:05, that sort of thing. So what the system is going to do is when they clock in, based on their arrival time, it's going to look at the duration and it's going to say when they should clock out. So it will, tell them right when they arrive. If they're on the telephony, it'll say arrival time is 10:03 a.m. Your expected departure time is 1:03 p.m. So it'll tell them that, and so it kind of gives them a little, oh yeah, I guess I was a couple minutes late. I'm gonna have to stay a couple minutes late, and that way it helps you get your fully scheduled time and your fully scheduled units done, and that happens on both the telephony and on the mobile app. And as it says here, again with the Ankota system, it can be configured to tell them that, and then on the departure end, it'll tell them if they're leaving early. So let's say they forget about that, they clocked in at 10:03, now they're trying to leave at exactly 1 o'clock or maybe even 12:59. The system's going to say, your expected departure time is not until 1:03. If you want to complete your fully scheduled time, please hang up and log back in after 1:03 p.m. That's what it says. All right, so another best practice is that we do have the situation where caregivers will arrive and then they finish for the day and they just forget to clock out. And it just happens even to the best of caregivers now and again. So the way that we handle that in Ankota is we have something that runs overnight and it says, we have a clock in without a clock out. We have a provision in there. It knows if this visit was scheduled for overnight. And in that case, it knows it's fine. But if they were supposed to clock out at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, in the middle of the night, it's saying, they didn't clock out. Let me put this visit on hold. So the next morning, the office will know, and they can contact the caregiver and the client, and figure out what really happened. So when that happens, then the office will know to contact the caregiver, and then as a follow-up, our recommendation is to have them do a one visit timesheet, and I'm going to talk about that more in a minute. All right, and not even in a minute, in 5 seconds. So agencies before EVV and or before like clock in with telephony and mobile. And by the way, I mean Missouri's been ahead of the pack, and most agencies have had a system for a while. Is that if there is, before I guess you're on a system like this, there's generally like a full week timesheet. But one of the best practices when you move to having an automated system is to just have a single visit timesheet. And that way, if a mistake is made, you just have to get a sign off for that one visit, and that the whatever the discrepancy was, caregiver forgot to clock out or the client's phone died, it could be written down. You get a caregiver signature and a client signature, and now you have a record of it. So if you're going to get an audit. Okay, so then kind of moving on, the next best practice is that sometimes your caregivers, when either you bring EVV for the first time or they're new, they're going to say that, hey, the EVV isn't working. And sometimes what you experience is it's really just they're a little bit resistant to change, or maybe they fear the technology and that kind of thing. So what we recommend as a best practice is that when they call in the office and they say it doesn't work, or maybe you've called them to say, hey, I don't see you clocked in, and they say, oh, it's because the EVV didn't work. We recommend that the office be trained to say, hey, let's just try it together. And then the office manager could clock in even from their cell phone as if they were that caregiver, and capture the time and then clock in and say, okay, I mean, it seemed like it worked from my side. Are you sure you want to try it on your side now? And then you could go through the arrival and the departure. But again, if this is a great training exercise, but of course, if the office clocked in, you're going to have a hey, the clock in was from the wrong phone number, and you are going to have to get the single visit timesheet in that case as well. But it is in general, sometimes it's just a little bit of fear. And in general, when we bring an organization live, around 80% of the caregivers get it right away. And then there's some that have a little bit of fear or need a little bit of hand holding, and this is a good best practice. All right, so I mentioned this next one early on, is that if you have back-to-back visits, so here I have that our client Rhonda Rocket has visits for personal care and homemaker with Cameron Diaz, and it's scheduled noon to 2 for the personal care and 2 to 3 for the homemaker. And these are, again, what we've called contiguous visits. So, but from the caregiver's perspective, they just see it's scheduled from noon to 3. So you don't need your caregiver to clock out in the middle and say, okay, I'm done with my personal care now and I'm moving on to my homemaker, because the reality is that when they're in the home, they're going to do what's needed at the time that it's needed. You know, they're going to get the laundry right in, and they're going to feed the client their meals when they need their meals and that type of thing. So they're going to work on all the tasks, but this is going to know what tasks are on their list, let them clock in once and let them clock out once. That's how it works on the mobile. Okay, so when it comes down to electronic visit verification, there's a lot of options as well to deal with some of the failures that you see. So, you know, sometimes if the address is wrong, you correct it, you correct the location. If you do have a client who's serviced in multiple locations, you can put both of them in. We will, by the way, when the state finalizes their EVV plans, we'll double check that ruling. There's also, if there's multiple valid phone numbers, so let's say that there's 2 landlines in the phone, one for the client and one for the, you know, for the live-in, you know, for the live-in caregiver, that type of thing. If there are multiple valid landlines, you could have both of them in there. And so another, you know, option is available is you could let the caregiver clock in from a known client phone, even if a visit isn't scheduled. So this is something you would have to ask us to do, but if, you know, some of our customers have it. So if you dial from a certain phone number, we know that that's Mrs. Johnson's phone number, then we'll just create a visit for Mrs. Johnson with that caregiver. So that's another one. And the mobile app is a great option. I'd say more and more of our customers are using the mobile app rather than the telephony. And Missouri, I'd say compared to other states, Missouri's been a little behind in that, but we're seeing more and more. And so the fob is that option, as I mentioned earlier, to use if there's no home phone and the caregiver doesn't want to use their cell phone. We also have options, don't let the caregiver clock in if they're not using the right phone. So we could just restrict them, or don't let them clock in if it's too early or too late, and don't let the caregiver clock in if they're too far away. So, you know, sometimes we've seen caregivers running late, but they're like, oh, I'll just clock in from my car. And that'll of course flag the error, but we also have a way of saying, hey, you're not close enough to the home, and we'll let them clock in. All right, so fobs are we've talked about this, but this is just to give you an example. This is what the fob looks like. And this is essentially, every fob is different. There's a little serial number on the back, but if I push on one fob and I get this number 641966, you know, based on that one fob, it's gonna say, oh, okay, it's now July the 14th at 1:38 p.m., but no other fob is going to give that exact same code at the same time. They're all different. So that's how that works. And we do, by the way, recommend that you zip tie that in the home. So you know, because it is important that it be, you know, kind of placed and affixed in the locations. That's another best practice. All right, so we're flying through, and we're about 2/3 of the way through, but we're going to keep going and try to go even faster. But the next area is visit approval. So some best practices here are that if the visit is compliant, then it should auto approve, right? And in most of our agencies, we see, we recommend even when people go live that you should try to be very quickly over 80% compliant. And, you know, and ultimately most of our agencies that have been using the system for a while are over 90% compliant. And, but the visits that aren't compliant, they need to be reviewed and approved so you can make sure the times are right. And as we get into state EVV, that's going to become more and more important. All right, so what do you want to check there is you want to make sure you have the right phone number or GPS, the right duration, it's within the authorization. And if it was a visit that was quote unquote created on the fly and not scheduled, that's something you want to get to the bottom of if that's the way that you work. And so these are some of the minimum checks. And by the way, the system, of course, does these automatically, and it just brings them to a visit approval dashboard for you. So another best practice is that for every visit that needs to be approved, you want to not be approving the same problem, like a wrong phone number, every day. And so maybe that client's home phone number was keyed in wrong in the first place. You don't want your team seeing an exception on that same person every day. Just fix the phone number. And that's something that, you know, sometimes the schedules aren't aware you could do. Or there's even a way, sometimes the address that, you know, if you say, hey, we're at 1 Franklin Street, then, you know, that mailbox might be on the road, but if you're in a rural area, that house might be half a mile down a long driveway. And in that case, you have to fix the GPS location. And sometimes what you'll find is with some caregivers, it'll say the GPS is not provided. So the first time you run the mobile app's going to say you need to enable your GPS, but sometimes caregivers will say no to that question. So if you're seeing, time after time that a certain caregiver isn't providing GPS, then you'll need to reach out to them and get them to enable GPS for the Ankota app or the app that you're using. All right, and then repeated caregiver error. Again, try to train the caregiver. Try not to put up with it all day long. And it's really important to look at your approval rate. And again, the auto approval rate should be greater than 80% on day one. And like I said, with most of our agencies, they're well over 90% a little bit down the road. All right, still flying through billing and payroll. So one thing we really recommend you do is to approve visits every day, because if something is wrong with the visit, you want to talk to the consumer or the client and your caregiver or attendant right away and not let it linger. Because if you call next Monday and you say, hey, there was something wrong on your timesheet on Wednesday, they're not going to remember the details. Whereas if you call the next day or approve even the same day, say, hey, it said that you clocked out from the wrong phone, what's going on? You could get the answer right away. So the rationale, of course, is that you get it when while the information is there, and also then you don't have a big bunch of work to do when it's billing time. If you're approving these as you go, and then Monday is payroll calculation day, or maybe Wednesday is EmoMed billing day. The fact that you've taken care of these as they're coming through is going to make your billing and payroll very smooth. All right, so billing best practices is, and here it's actually, I call it, but it's actually the Missouri rules. You have to round down for Medicaid to completed 15 minutes of billing. So if the person's scheduled for an hour, they're there 58 minutes, you can only bill for 45, but good news is you can hold on to that 13 minutes and bill it later. So that's the next best practice, is accumulate the minutes. And what I'd say is in our in-home agencies, most don't round the payroll for employees. So if they work that extra 4 minutes, they'll pay them for that 4 minutes right away, but then they'll hold on to it for billing. Whereas with the CDS attendants, where, like, again, we have that typical scenario where they're going to be paid for 3 hours a day, but they're there all day, then the rule is more, is pay for what you could bill. And then when that accumulated minutes comes up for the CDS, you could pay the attendant at the same time that you're billing it. All right, so some more billing best practices. You could bill as often as you like. Some agencies run every day and get it out of the way. Others do it weekly, others every 2 weeks, whatever your case may be. So CyberAxe is only going to pay you every 2 weeks. So I guess the most efficient is to probably only do your billing every 2 weeks. But especially when you're new to the process, we like you to bill every day. And if there are any errors that in your data, let's say you had a wrong DCN, you want to find those things right away. Another one is that there's a cutoff on Fridays in Missouri on our billing weeks at Friday, I believe at 5 o'clock Central Time. Don't quote me on that, but we need to, so we really recommend that you don't start your billing Friday afternoon and then find errors, because you might not be able to resolve the errors that quickly. So we recommend to all our agencies that on the weeks when CyberAccess is, has the cutoff for billing, that you run your billing process no later than Wednesday. And then when you submit to CyberAccess, the next morning you're getting what's called a claim confirmation, and it'll tell you if everything looked good, and that's a really good indicator that everything's going to be, set for paying. And next one is we have this, we have this concept called the start of billing date. So let's say that you signed up with Ankota today after this webinar, you went live on August 1st, then we would set your start of billing date to August 1st. And what that does is that if in October, some caregiver says, oh my gosh, I didn't really understand the EVV in August, I forgot to give you this paper timesheet, then the system's always going to go back and capture anything, as soon as you're aware of it. And of course, the system's smart enough to only bill once. So that's that. And then when we talk about our other, we've mostly talked about Medicaid today, but when we talked about our Veterans Administration billing, our private pay, and our others, we have, we can make a very pretty invoice with your logo. If you have an invoice today, we'll try to replicate it as close as possible. And then for the VA, we have actually some bill VA with CMS 1500 paper claims, some with a UB04 but more and more of the agencies are moving to electronic billing through a clearinghouse, and we could help you with that if you want. And we also have worked out now, there's like, Platte County, I know is one of them, where there's kind of split billing, and we have that all worked out now where the consumer might have to pay a portion of the bill, and it'll allocate, like typical is 80-20 case where the county will pay 80% of the visit and the consumer will pay 20%. So that's all other things. But if you have other payers, let us know and we'll help you with all the payers. All right, getting down toward the end. So on to payroll. There's two approaches. There's what we recommend is just like the billing, the system knows what what's been completed and approved that hasn't been paid, and then it'll pay for that up to your payroll cutoff date, and that's what we recommend. And then this way that just make sure that anything that was like from an old timesheet takes care of it. We do have a couple agencies who say, nope, as soon as the visit's closed, I want to pay for it, even if I'm waiting for an approval thing, and they run it a little bit differently. But those are two approaches that we've seen with agencies in Missouri. And we could make the payroll, in general, whatever format you need for getting that over to your paycheck writing company. We could usually provide that in the format that you need. All right, so more on payroll side. There's, again, a lot of variation on certain how different agencies that we work with in Missouri do things. Some don't pay for travel. Some, like I would say the most standard cases, they don't pay for travel to the first visit or home from the last visit, but they do pay in between. They pay for errand miles and that kind of thing. So this is an area where we're not saying that we know a best practice of how you should do it. What we're saying is the best practice is that you decide your approach, and then you should approve it with your labor council and make sure that you're not going to have any legal issues with your approach down the road. Okay, and then a couple things about CDS payroll. Again, as we've said a few times, the consumer is the employer, and most agencies cut separate checks. But one of the Ankota best practices is that let's say you have one caregiver who's doing some in-home, and then they're working with two different CDS consumers, they could just have one ID. They could clock in, do all their visits, as one individual. And then on the back end, we'll split it out to the different checks and handle all that. All right, I'm going to go really fast through remittance just because we're getting very short on time here. But in the area of remittance processing, what happens, of course, is that after you've submitted your claims to EmoMed, you're going to get what's called remittance advice, and you're going to get a deposit in your bank account is the reality of it. And the remittance advice will come and tell you, what's been approved, what's been denied, and that type of information. And when you process that in the system, it will go through everything you bill, which is called your accounts receivable, and it'll mark down what's been paid off and kind of leave open what hasn't been paid off. And then that tells you, oh, okay, well, yeah, I went over my authorization for whatever reason on this one, so I can't rebill that one. Or, oh no, this looks like it was a problem on their end, and what you could rebill, and that's what that's all about. So, and these are some of the reasons not to get paid, and then what you have to fix is that you didn't submit the bill, or it wasn't scheduled, or there were some information. We try to work this out when we're getting a customer live to make sure it's all set up front. We do sample claims with you and with EmoMed. And one that comes a lot is if the person does get two services in the same day, they're going to reject that, and you're going to need to submit all the units together. That is something that will definitely change with EVV, because with EVV at the state level, you're going to know exactly what time they arrive. But well, I actually have some news on how Missouri's going to do it, which I think from the billing side it might not change, but you're definitely going to need to track the visits and their arrival and time and departure times individually. All right, let's kind of keep on going and finalizing the remittance here. Is there's some really good exceptions reports, and you want to look at the exceptions reports. And we have I think my favorite report's one called Collection Reconciliation. It goes through everything that was in the 835 remittance, and it tells you what was paid, what wasn't paid, and then even when things are there, you have to decide, okay, I'm going to fight to get paid for this, or this one I'm not going to get paid for. And then you want to balance your books to zero in all cases. So if you're not going to get paid for it, you do want to write it off. All right, on to some fun stuff in our last minutes here. Next thing you want to do is be able to optimize your revenue. And so here are some things you do right away, or you want to put in your authorizations so you don't overbill. You want to bill for those extra 3 minutes, 6 minutes here, and you want to use all the units in the month. And we have some really nice reports to help you know what to do. And one of the best practices is to look on the 20th of the month and say, hey, this caregiver is over their units. What's going on? Let's make sure that they come in right, or this caregiver is under the units. Oh yeah, they had a hospitalization. Let's bump up those those hours or those units to get that person over the goal line. So that's some things there. All right, very quickly, we've helped a lot of agencies through COVID-19 with a few things. I'm going to cover them here. One is that if visits are canceled due to COVID-19, we highly recommend that you keep that, and you'd be able to keep that information and be able to build a canceled due to COVID report in the future. So this one is canceled due to weather, and this one is, those two were canceled due to COVID. So you'll have that information down the road. Another is that several of our agencies came up with COVID care plans. One agency is asking these around 10 or 11 questions. This one's asking a smaller list of questions. If you needed help with any of these things, probably this is coming out in July. If you were going to do that, you would have done it by now. And then the last one is that there are authorizations that are sort of automatic now, that anybody who has personal care or CDS is authorized for 20 units of telephone calls. So you could have supervisory check-ins, or even so you could basically call into the person and have somebody sitting in an office or even working from home and calling them, and you could get reimbursed for that. So if that's something that you're not doing, you want help with, let us know. We're not exactly sure how long that program will stay in place, but it is still in effect as of this date in July 2020. All right, so a couple nuggets here on Missouri State EVV. So, what is it? Where did it come from? Of course, it came nationwide in the 21st Century Cures Act. And basically, the original law was that it had to be in place by January 1st, 2020. And at an agency level, this is still the case. I mean, as an individual agency, you could be audited for EVV, but the states need to collect and review that information, and have asked for delays on that. So really, I mean, this is from the EVV law, except for this last bullet. What EVV needs is you need to know what was the type of service, who's receiving the service, what was the date, location, the individual providing the service, and the time. And then Missouri is also asking for the care plan items. So that's something that we haven't seen in other states. But bottom line is Missouri's looking at that and saying, hey, this is great. We could do an audit remotely. And so make sure that your information's in good shape. So today, this is sort of an oversimplified picture, is that you send in your claims the client, date of service, type of service, number of units, and the charge amount, but nothing about the times and the locations. But you need to keep these times and locations so you have them handy and ready for an audit. What we've heard from the state is they're going to have what's called an aggregator, and we believe it to be separate from EMOMed. So we believe that claims are going to go straight to EMOMed, but you're going to send all your EVV information over to this aggregator. And by the way, there's a rule that your software company needs to not charge you for the integration with the aggregator. And so that's something you should be aware of. But there's this new information, so the location of service, either the GPS, the matching phone number, and also the tasks are going to have to go to the aggregator. So this is when they came out, and this was actually in 2019, we were told that they would be putting out an RFP, or that they would be applying to the federal government for a good faith extension to not have this in place until January of 2021, and that they were going to put out a request for proposal for the aggregator, and that they were expecting the agencies to be fully compliant by 2021. But to my knowledge, that request for proposal hasn't gone out yet. And what we are seeing with COVID is that some states have moved beyond January 1st of 2021, but this is really all we know at this time. And really the best advice here is be ready for it. And then just one last bonus. We did a webinar a couple weeks ago with this guy, handsome guy here, Steve the Hurricane. Steve is a home care marketing expert. And just a quick story I wanted to share is that he said that he looked at nationwide data as accumulated by this group you might have heard of called Home Care Pulse. And Home Care Pulse said that 60% of agencies saw their visits decline in April and May, of 2020 because of COVID. But what Steve's group did is they actually went out and they coached all of their agencies that they work with to look at this as an opportunity and to figure out ways that they could reach out by phone. And actually 90% of the agencies that they're doing coaching with had more visits in April, or more clients and more hours in April, and even more in May. So that's an opportunity. And actually on our webinars page, this webinar is up there, and there's even an offer from Steve to give you a free consultation. So look at you could Google or go to YouTube and say Ankota Steve the Hurricane. So that's kind of the last bonus. And here we are with a few minutes left, and we're into the you've made it. So I know that was a marathon. So many things that make the Missouri Medicaid program special and complicated. And just from an Ankota perspective, I mean, we really appreciate all of you hanging through this whole webinar and and listening in to all these best practices. We will make this available on YouTube, and we're really happy to have you, and we're so happy that we could try to keep you focusing on care while we focus on the tech. Couple things here. This is a little bit more toward our customers. I think they know this, but if you saw anything in the webinar that you don't have in your environment, you want it, just reach out to our support. And you'll also be getting occasional calls from Jed Hamill, who's our director of customer success, and he'll, when he reaches out to you, you can say, hey, I saw this on the webinar, can you help me get that implemented? So he can help you as well. And also, if there is something that we haven't learned about in Missouri yet, or that you think would make the product better, let us know. I mean, for things that are not critical requests, we usually get them into the software in about 8 weeks. And of course, anything that's an emergency, we take care of it right away. All right. And, and just, I mean, we really, in Ankota, we focused on specific states, Missouri being one of them. And the more customers we get in Missouri, the better we can do for Missouri and that kind of thing. So we do have a referral bonus to our customers. If you refer a new agency to us and they sign up, then, you could get a discount off your next bill, or some customers are ask us to send it to them directly, and we're happy to do that as well. All right, so with that, we are almost out of time, but Sarah, why don't we take maybe 1 or 2 questions at most?
Okay, great. So let me start with this one. I think you touched a little bit about it, but if you wanted to elaborate a bit about how Missouri is doing in comparison to other states regarding EBV.
Yeah, it is a great question. So I would say that there are some states that are ahead. I guess I would say that Missouri, most providers already have telephony and mobile apps in place. So from that perspective, you're ahead of some states that have been, for example, in Virginia, we've been moving most people off of paper timesheets. So from that perspective, you're ahead. But as far as the specific plans and the formats and how to get the information to the aggregator, now that it's already in July, and with the deadline still officially being January 1st of 2021, I'm starting to feel a little pressure, like it's a little behind. But if you're working with Ankota, we will be fully compliant for you, as soon as the deadlines are launched. So that's a great question. You have one other one?
Yep, I do have one other one. They say, I'm currently billing manually. How quick can I get billing EmoMed electronically?
Oh, got it. So, I guess there's a couple scenarios. One is if you're, let's say, using our system and you have, and you're doing all the scheduling and that kind of thing, and you just, wanted to bill manually at first before moving over, then it's really quick. I mean, we have your information, and we could probably get you billing electronically in a week or 2, that type of thing. But if you're a brand new customer, and our record is we had a customer go live in 3 days in Missouri, but in general, especially if you're a sizable agency, the average time to go from not having a system at all to having the Ankota system and being able to bill and do payroll and everything is, we recommend having, it's really up to the agency on your side, but the average is around 4 weeks, and up to 6 weeks for bigger agencies. So that's the time, I'd say. All right, so with that, I'm going to just wrap up on a couple things. I mean, if you like what you heard today, or maybe even you're watching this on YouTube after the fact, and you say, wow, these guys, I think they could help me, reach out to sales@ankota.com, support@ankota.com. Reach out to either one. We're very proud of our support team. And even if you're not a customer and you call them and you need some help or you want to learn more about the product, they're great people to talk to, or reach out to sales. We try to make our phone number easy, 844-4-ANKOTA. And then we wrote the number down there, but I guess 4-ANKOTA is a little bit easier to remember. You can spell it. We also, as I mentioned here, we have we've created a site that's really independent of Ankota called A Home Care Community. And we're trying to share best practices. So here's a page where you have a forum, and then we have like Missouri specific discussions. It looks like there's 7 discussions going on among Missouri agencies right now. So that might be something that you want to check out. And with that, we're going to say thank you. And again, a marathon webinar. This, I think, will be the longest one we have on YouTube, and it was definitely the longest one we did. And we're going to let you all go for now, and wish you a great day.
Thanks for watching this video from Ankota. For further information, scroll down and click on the link in the video description below. Have a great day.